have the same capabilities and standards moderators, but in addition, they can manage blocked words and change the chat modes in live, according to this new managing something. But here we go. My name is Owen Yule, and I used to be DJ Money until cyber domestic abuse pushing me to suicide with an old predator. Um, and so it's interesting. I still have my YouTube page, but they gave away my Instagram page, and they're fucking around with my passwords and stuff on my other Facebook account. But anyways, getting to know me as I continue forward in life. Old elementary school friends, middle school friends, high school friends that know me. I don't need your support. I don't need a Charles Manson manipulation. And again, the reasons why I'm not getting laid isn't a lie. I chose to stay absent, and I fell in love with this girl. Even though I didn't win her, I'm not passive aggressive, and uh, you know, found different parts of society I don't contend to or agree with. But anyways, back to the part where my grandma had her own little mental illness, scrapbooking and family and cherishing moments, and trying her best to be a good wife, and stuff that you don't appreciate as a kid. And now that my mom and grandma are passed on, I'm going through the grieving process and stuff, and finding myself selling the last property we had. And had we flipped it like the elitists with all the properties we had in our family, we'd probably have a lot of rental properties and would have been smarter about this, where we'd all be able to live for free between aunts and uncles and stuff. But because we don't get along, and dysfunctional family, and don't get along in the different societal parts of the different Charles Manson categories, whether it's church or police or lawyers, or, cartel members or music or mafia or church or whatever. I find myself alone and vulnerable. As an only child, no brothers and sisters, and I don't know who my dad is, but I'm pretty sure I found mom's rapist, who popped up later into my faming, so scared of a storyline that, even though whatever the documents are in mom's clinical record, that somehow I found that higher power of those corrupted people that are allowed to rape women, breed children for labor, farming, and breeding. And in this different way, my grandma and grandpa were asleep to that society. Granted, my grandpa had 5 kids, but we never walked that elitist path. Now I found those other people that I think showed up at my faming snitching on themselves of their predatory behavior that the police department at my mom's passing, at this investigation won't contend to on that, and I'm still seeing their domestic abuse with the policing from that same family in an inbred colony. And it's sad because they're so addicted to themselves, their own inbred colony, that they don't even know how to exit with proper care for Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and dot dot Indians and woo woo Indians, and everything else. And as I sit here discussing this as a grown man, and I have one kid, and I wanted to have one family, and again, mistakes happen. I went suicidal and held a loaded gun to my head and stuff like that. And, ruined it. Only cheated once out of my 8-year relationship or whatever. And it was earlier on in the relationship, but again, in my honesty and these ventures of finding somebody else out there in society who has the same honesty, it ends up becoming some realization of my own fuckboy shit, my own ego at some terms. Yet I thought I was remaining pretty tame, but at the same time, you end up learning parts the hard way, where again, sometimes you don't get along with people. You just have to accept the consequences of life. People grow up, people move on. So again, I want to give a shout out to everybody: Kevin Gates, T-Rone, Birdman, Tory Lanez, Nikki Heat, and everybody else that I was hanging out with or working on getting features for in my actual career, which I'll get to in another scrapbook and probably another live video of my resume building up to, not necessarily being a spoiled kid. I just had a grandpa who busted his ass, and now that same cartel farmed my whole family right out of every house and everything that we owned to cherish. And this is how well my grandma kind of kept care of some of that stuff. And so I'm going to introduce you to myself, thinking about myself in a selfish way because I'm vulnerable. I'm an only child. There's really not much more I have besides the memories entitled to me, in which, upon, the passing of grandma being, you know, a descendant to this Yule family. I went through legal guardianship and stuff like that with a couple potentially inbred family members, or whatever you want to call it, or mentally ill family members, or people that got lost in the sauce or trapped in their own mind. Yet there's certain parts of it that exploit itself for myself to learn about in a hard way, harsh reality of life, or how foul some people can be, or just what their mental illness is. And when you disengage yourself from it and look at it from this third party perspective, or from God's perspective, the third eye, third party, the third eye, God's perspective, going up above the earth, staring down at these individual families and employers and societal terms, again, doctors, lawyers, and judges, and friends and family and foes, and anger issues and possessive issues, sex addiction issues, and drug addiction issues, and everything else that when you go into those clinics to decide who's the decider of what addiction is versus knowing oneself, and going back completely sober to discuss it with yourself, you end up, coming to terms with certain parts of society that's the norm, and again, certain parts that end up being like, you know, what the masses are used to. Again, a football game, a baseball game, soccer game, hockey game, whatever. And the jocks and athletic side, and then you got, ballet and music and theater arts, and hair and makeup and fashion and stuff on the art side. And, then you got the lawyers and judges, and they all have their own little distinguished subcategories, et cetera, et cetera. So, again, my name is Owen Yule, and I used to be DJ on Money. You got cyber abuse, probably 10 times over worse than I think I ever cyber abused anybody. From who I was before to my new Facebook and everything else that you guys see, obviously I'm a little bit more of a cyber abuser now, and whatever these tariffs would be to destroy myself later, but at the same time, it's again standing up for myself, name dropping people, or saying who I had sex with or didn't have sex with. There's people that don't like it. Again, don't kiss and tell to other people, where it's like, you want to be honest with your new spouse, and that's something I appreciate you guys for the ones that aren't possessive and the ones that aren't trying to pussy block me and subconsciously possessive over me, which I'm finding those people too. I'm finding gay men, and I'm finding Tim Cook, I'm finding Rockefeller, and these weird possessive ways of racketeering me to specific record labels when I owned my own record label with my own resume, and for some reason they wanted to discredit me and prevent storylines of whatever their corruptions did to me. They went into guilt and hesitation, and then they beat the shit out of me in this other way. And again, going out there to be a pervert or not, just to see some titties at the Playboy Mansion with tons of money and win a Playboy model, or to actually just be a music video director or end up shooting a movie later, at the different parts of law and the different parts of feminism, of what's allowed and what's not allowed without yourself being perverted, and what a script is, and you know what the music videos can tend to, and everybody's individual personalities. This is the toughest part about business, where you find some people are okay with stuff, and you find other people that are not. And again, hanging out with a heroin addict for the first time, and going through all these different ventures when I was a meth addict, and I went down a rabbit hole in kind of a bad way, but yet I'm sure my daughter's out there in search for me, so I just kind of want to give her a heads up. And some of the stuff in my monotone vocals, you know, just because I gave up custody of, assuming I was going to get a record deal and go out and be on tour. Being a busy dad, trying to make a little bit of money to pay for a car in college, I ended up finding these pedophile men that get so possessive over their generational farming that they're doing it earlier and earlier. And again, I can't speak for my ex-spouse's other side of the story, her true side and her dark side. And whether I was cheated on, it's none of my business. we all choose our own life path, and as nosy as you want to be and as much as you want people to love you, sometimes it just doesn't work out. Whether I'm handsome enough on the exterior, or whether I talk too much in these weird ways in philanthropy, or psychology and psychiatry, and to the other sides of going through these different ventures of life that proclaim my attitude and my intelligence, and you know missing the old me and loving the new me, and being an assistance to myself as a vulnerable person without being codependent on others for money or a place to lay my head, a ride with the car. I think I'm doing pretty good. Um, Again, I could show you all my Facebook messages and shit like that if I was to, for the nosies. But again, some people don't want that type of stuff exploited. That when I'm in my down, you might need a ride to the grocery store or a ride to the dentist. And those weird little subcategories of true and truth, I find myself talking to myself, uh, going through scrapbooks after the grieving process of the lost and grandma and mom. And again, I got, I think, 2 or 3 uncles left, and one aunt. And I'm not doing all my homework yet because, again, going through the grieving process for everybody, and not wanting to get into those other civil disputes within family. Um, Maintaining something to cherish without burning bridges, and yet certain bridges to burn so I can go out and make money in my own way. Because the other side of society, whatever society you choose that does or doesn't like me, is, again, being passive aggressive towards the women that they're allowing to breed. And I'm trying to leave opportune for that. But again, I'll be 40 here in July. I got about 5 years left of being able to breed, and how long it takes to create trust with the spouse without getting screwed over. Getting a girl pregnant the first year or two without obtaining trust first is put myself inevitably in some category where I got, again, in my version of how I see their hierarchy of generational farming, that these people are more intelligent in a specific way, but more corrupted for their own self-centeredness in taking stuff that I don't want to say belonged to me, and possessiveness, because you can't own human beings, or at least so I thought. But following the math, following the money, and a weird autistic behavior of patterns, I found repeater offenses within a subgroup of human beings that have a last name that ended up creating themselves a generational farming atmosphere of labor and breeding to empire and racketeer, which is exploited specifically to, up to the president level, and child trafficking and stuff. And again, it's hard to see, but when you do the math on the political side, it ends up, deterring you from whether or not you become them and fight it back. And again, me losing a couple houses and now my cabin, to these same people just being a little bit more polite. I still have a dominance, but being just a little bit more polite, that if they want something materialistically or want to have sex with my girlfriend just a little bit more, sometimes you kind of, I don't want to say step off the beaten path or step off the path of what dominance is, but you allot time, you allow and you allot time, um, for those determining factors of maturity, and who has your back, and being backstabbed and whatever else in this digital society, as well as reality. And reality is the version you see with your eyes. Granted, you see the digital society with your eyes, but the amount of mental illnesses behind this new digital world, there is no book for dummies. And again, people that are passive aggressive or possessive over their digital characters, again, like playing a game of Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter or The Sims, in which you create these characters in a computer on your phone. And for some people, you know, their real persona in the street life of reality, where you see them at McDonald's, to what you see on Instagram and Facebook, and the mental illnesses that are starting to consist in a whole new world of psychology and psychiatry that I'm sure the other world doesn't even realize in themselves yet, because it was so new to us. So many people were, became available to that book for dummies in this new world of psychology and psychiatry of their possessiveness and their characters. Again, if you like Shang Tsung, if you like Scorpion or Sub Zero or Katana, Sindel in the game of Mortal Kombat, and whatever persona, let's say, you portray off of that video game, you end up, having your favorite characters, your favoritisms, and you start to believe in yourself in these weird ways, as I did as DJ Money and a persona. And so when I got digitally abused in this, cybersecurity side of some market, which again, I've never engaged in prostitution and some of that stuff. I always thought I had sometimes friends with benefits after breakups. And again, I don't mean to speak about this in a sexual venture or undermine myself, for, again, specific people that I thought I had trust with that, I ruined trust with. It would be my own fault. And again, admitting to this can destroy your own career, but at the same time, I'm a little bit more humble admitting to it because there's no laws that permit, as long as I don't name drop in some of those other tariff sides of not ruining their relationships and creating divorces and those games of economics that lawyers and judges and other men that are thirsty towards those females would love to see some of those females go single. And I'm trying my best not to approach that side. And so I apologize in some dignity, but I also hope you guys appreciate some of this vulnerability and communication from my perspective of, I will not infringe or walk on your path. In the Bible, in the Ten Commandments, we say, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. And again, friends with benefits through some of those zones. Before we were married or before we had kids, it was different. Now that the majority of us are raised and grown up and have kids, we all change our perspectives and tame ourselves or whatever from some of our own dark sides and foul behavior before we decided to commit to a greater version of ourselves and our mistakes. And again, no regrets. And then the parts of life that you do regret. And so, again, I appreciate my audience listening. And for those who have vocal comprehension versus facial comprehension of deciding on drugs or is that too big a word, or, manipulating some Charles Manson behavior to get laid or create my own cartel. And so, more on a scientific side, psychology side, anthropic side of my decision making. We all learn some digital worlds that will get thrown from your hand without understanding this digital world psychology and these new tricks from the cartels and stuff like that. Now, most heterosexual chicks allowing a lot more gays to exist in society because if they, girl, you can wear that when our teenage kids, in high school, when the manipulations start, just so kids get naked earlier so they can see it on their digital phones and our addictions, which again, some parts are good, some parts are bad. The sex with everybody. We wouldn't be born, we wouldn't be here if it didn't permit, if it didn't exist. And at the same time, the addictions of it to the new addictions of the other society, new roads you see, and everybody's paying attention to it. I'm sure high school teachers see it even more. To what the problem is, to what the government shutdown is, to sitting kids through the computers now versus putting other kids at risk in other ways of those ventures. And it's interesting data to think about as a parent. I don't want to be prejudiced or biased and be against your family and friends, but how much it's segregated us in our personal little space bubbles in our brain and through the camera and through the pictures, what we start to observe. But anyways, again, this is kind of our family history of to where I just ended. Friends and family that we built our cabins with, grandma and grandpa, starting of the property from what a road would be and where the government put in the road to, your portion of cutting down the trees and where we go to when we talk with Greta Thunberg and Kara saying the system isn't working, to every tree you cut down, whether it becomes your house or it becomes the paper that ends up going into your pocket to build you your house, or if you build your house yourself and you use these trees for firewood. And this was the old version back of where you end up realizing these little differences of, the full side of the economy to the person who built the machine for you to even to be able to do this stuff. When we were planet hopping and we landed on Earth and we said, all right, we came from Mars, we landed here, we need to build one of these real quick. We need to build one of these real quick just so we can, start putting our life together. And before you can start cutting down trees, I'm sure when we planet hopped and got here, all we had was a chainsaw. I'm sure in our first UFO and our first Elon Musk mobile, SpaceX, when we planet hopped, and again, don't think we didn't. We're just different aliens. You got Mexicans, you got whites, you got blacks. And I think we all landed here, and the angels descended from the heavens, our ancestors. Okay, and so through these versions of my type of philanthropic of knowing we exist, knowing we've been planet hopping and just coming over with the chainsaw and cutting down the trees and making space for yourself and then milling the trees to build yourself a house so you can keep yourself covered upon the planet in which you received. And so this is kind of my life story from that point. And my grandma and grandpa bought a piece of property, and I won't go into the political financial subsidies of this conversation, but my grandpa busted his ass. He built the Shedd Aquarium. He built the Dane County Coliseum. He was the plant manager for Zoc Joseph Fabricators and Steel Manufacturing. And then he was a builder of many buildings at MATC in Madison, a couple places down in Chicago and Milwaukee. And so into our venture, he ended up, finishing his first house he purchased. And then he built himself a cabin to prove himself his trades, to take care of his wife and 5 children. And my mom was one of those 5 children. So anybody getting to know me in LA and anybody getting to know me in the music industry at my beginning of faming to before the cybersecurity and tariffs and stalkers and whatever else, in which I'm still learning and tons of stuff I didn't go to school for. I'm not academically intelligent. And my mom ended up becoming schizophrenic, fairly early in life or before I was born, which I have those clinical notes, which might be end up becoming another video series too for people that like to be nosy and understand people and want to know where they come from or what side of life they are. And so for whatever my white privilege is to people that cared enough to document their history of putting in a house, which back then wasn't concrete, just cylinder box stacked before you put down your bottom plate, started framing up your walls and putting in your floor joists and putting in your subfloor and et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is the documented process from my grandma and her kids and their friends, and all the way up to the first wall up. And, in that version of it, there's my grandpa, heavy set dude. So again, whether I become vulnerable and share this information with people, which again, some people like mind your business and this is private life, or I enjoy my vulnerability being an only child and keeping it so real in specific ways that I can catch people in lies later or catch people that lie about my truth, which is kind of a fancy adventure too. Tell the whole truth, so help you God. And you keep it real in some of these other ventures, and other people like to be nosy and then go around manipulating specific ideas about you. When you mature up and whether you exploit these little terms of, what happens in life and how you value it later, of what you appreciate, what you call legacy, just like Amy Winehouse had. Her legacy was what? The heroin or making music or not going to rehab. And so, I've gone down different specific roads. I still didn't go to rehab, but I'm sober now. And so those thoughts of the reasons to exist in somebody else's mental illness, my grandma and grandpa's, and their appreciation for family, documenting it in photos that we call scrapbooks, to, the other side of what you end up realizing was just somebody else's mental illness. documenting stuff they cherished, whether it's materialistic of the actual building itself, and the framing project, which my grandpa built cash, come up every weekend with the truck and trailer and just build a little bit at a time. And through that whole process from, when they purchased the property in 84, 85 to, where I'm at now, I'm at the same place. And you can see this big window here. It's changed a little bit. You can see this tree here, which we'll get to at some point, but these versions of me where there I am with my mom having a cigarette, and what you end up finding out is supposed to be a good time of life. And having 40 years on one property, going from completely trees to knocked down and milled, and becoming the very property where you get to see my butt cheeks in a blurry way. And those old whatever, that's me, child pornography, whatever you want to call it. And so when you walk through these ventures of introducing yourself and going from when my grandpa had started this in his Dodge, and so here's the trailer, you got these corners and the tire that was here. If you look over here, it's 40 years later. The only thing that's missing is the tire. I had forgot it at the house I lost with my first fiance. But that's the same trailer. It still exists today. And so it's interesting information that trailer's probably 50 or 60 years old. But the other fancy part about that is my grandpa ended up building that trailer because he was a steel manufacturer, a steel fabricator. And so, in these interesting ways, July of '87, I was born in July. Again, from the floor all the way up to the structure. The parts we got, the first toilet seat for the bathroom, and how my grandma documented it in her mental illness of what she cherished that her husband did for her with her kids, and here's a few here. Just an empty shell to making it your home or your cabin. It's interesting information to think about. Some people do this with their families. Some actually spend the time to do their scrapbook, which is just pictures, or it's pictures with commentary, just like Instagram and Facebook. Burning one of our Holyoaks. A friend of ours feeding me a marshmallow. So stuff like that. This would technically be the Instagram of back then. A scrapbook would be the Instagram of back then, and that's what it's supposed to be. For some reason, in the cybersecurity world, I hit some jealousy. They're having a pretty girlfriend, or a girl I was courting, stuff like that. That some of those passive-aggressive men and nerds in that community ended up disciplining me because I guess I wasn't allowed to hang out with the girl, even though I was hanging out with the girl. Again, those type of men that when the girls say, "Well, I'm going to hang out with a friend," and then they come running around trying to figure out why they want to leave their other friend. They call it click. So back to the point of going through my grandma's version of what Instagram was, with pictures and commentary. And so, in those weird ventures of where some people like your life or don't like your life, and they want you to walk down specific roads, so it becomes this mind appeasement in your mind, in my grandma's mind, that when she would do her Instagram scrapbooking, it was specifically her mental illness, which again, in our society was normal for a while. It was a trend. And today we call it Instagram and Facebook. It's still just as much of a trend, but it's paperless. And so, again, in these versions right here of this porch, in which I did an addition to be a laundry room because it was just a cabin at first. At this big window here, 1, 2, and then the door, which I'll take my time because I think live videos are a little bit different. But if we look at it from the outside, you got here 1, 2 pillars and a big window, door, and then I did this addition. later, but I'm in the middle of selling my house or cabin now. Not again an inheritance per se, so I can change the perspective at this economic down right now because I got to get a job. And the other side screwed me over in the music industry to where I lost money on music to where I should have had a new car and been able to keep this place for legacy. But for whatever reason, those passive aggressive people that raped mom because they don't know who dad is in a specific way, or again decided not to be a dad that decided not to be involved, didn't want some specific storyline for me and his mental illness or their mental illness or whoever digitally abused me. And so this is basically the truth up to that point, kind of discussed, probably about 10, 9, 10 years later from that cyber abuse I got from Eminem and Duke and some other people in their fancy little ways. It doesn't seem like abuse to them, but was abuse to me because of the version of my mom's story. And again, whose side do I choose? I can't. But when you see where the domestic abuse came from, I kind of took mom's side. So back to she was the one that was there for me. So back to this fancy paper Instagram um, with pictures and commentary. And here's another year later again. So from that July period to June of '88, so this is about 1 year. Only getting some cupboards in, extra wall in, etc., to put in the drywall, um, etc. Um, it's a different thought process. But me trying to help put in some nails or screws for the drywall to what our kitchen is. As I go to, like I said, sell this now of what was cherished, and it should seem embarrassing, probably embarrassing to my other rich friends. Well, you're not good at making money. You shouldn't be losing your legacy of something your family built to, that version of turnover. And a turnover in rental properties in your freshman and sophomore, junior year of college. A turnover is when you move into your first dormitory, and then again you move out of the dormitory into your real life, and then you go into your fraternities, etc. And that turnover of life. Sometimes it's a divorce, sometimes it's having kids, sometimes it's a death in the family where you get inheritances and you decide if you can afford to keep your legacies or if you end up selling it and changing your life narrative to go live a new life. And, I don't want to say get rid of a memory, get rid of your legacy, but to, both one, cherish how far you've come to, stepping into a mindset, whether I step into a new spouse's life and I have to learn to cherish their stuff just as much, or find out my new spouse might not even cherish any of this stuff, and me deciding if the scrapbooking is even worth it, which was just a mental illness of documenting stuff, where out of every girlfriend I've found so far, those weird ways, they want to keep their mental illness of their documented history, and I want to keep my mental illness of my documented history, which ends up being a civil dispute according to politicians and that side of vocabulary. So, in these other perspectives of, proving it's okay to move on, it's okay one person wants to keep their mental illness versus yours, you can always flip the page forward. Or again, some people can't flip the page forward. They always go back and they say it's got to maintain the same way. It's got to maintain the same way. And so, and these weird things where people go through disownership in their families or don't communicate in the civil dispute of family, family distrust or family feuds, whatever you want to call it. And you make yourself look so pretty in a picture, that is family, it's family and friends, um, to the memories you cherish for yourself, or whether you want to gloat it in front of other people. And I don't consider this a gloat. Again, I didn't create this. My grandma did. It was her mental illness called scrapbooking, cherishing her family. And again, me showing this to other females that, either want to cherish something I have before I sell my house, or actually stepping down that road of entering into the female's life and maybe changing up the perspective of marriage. Instead of her taking my last name, maybe I'll take her last name because maybe she wants to keep her legacy, her family's mental illness a little bit more than mine. And you have to learn to adapt to that, because if you don't have that type of acceptance moving into a spouse's life, um, because you want it to be, you know, your way versus their way, their scrapbook way versus, my scrapbook way or grandma's scrapbook way, you end up finding all these neat mental illnesses in people. And again, I call it mental illness, which sounds so shallow, but in reality, it's just memory keeping of events in their life that you go through to appreciate something you worked hard on, all the way up to a finished project or a closely finished project. And so in this, getting to know me as Owen Yule, um, and, the finished product, hanging your first shot deer, and hanging the antlers around the house, enjoying the fire, and etc., to what that actually means to you and means to your family, and then deciding if you, again, want to keep this. And again, you don't want to guilt trip other people saying, I want my family history more than I want yours. Because once the deceased happens, what's passing happens in that turnover of life. Whether you have kids and you move into a bigger house because you don't have enough room, or whether you have kids and you stay in an apartment and you realize you don't really want to mow the lawn, you'd rather have the apartment people mow the lawn. And again, it's your choice. It's your mental illness. It's okay. That's what acceptance is in a different way. And so here's book one of scrapbooking of what we called the cabin that eventually I made it into my house in about 2010 to this point, to 2026 now, so 16 years. And, just enjoying what it was that, when we plant trees, and then the growth of the trees that exist now, then thereafter. And so keeping track of floods, June, and Black River Falls, which is where I'm at, Wisconsin, and when the rivers rose and we had flood, 800 evacuated. Members of a volunteer fire department where there was water in the streets next to a damn a payphone, and guys really sitting in a damn boat in the middle of the street that the river really flooded. Grandma documented all this. This is what, June 23rd, 1993. So, when you learn to cherish stuff, cherish life, and we document stuff like volcanoes, twisters, and floods, you end up finding the truth in weather, and you end up finding the lie in politics. And it's such a weird thing because they change the vocabulary words, which is sometimes still the truth and sometimes even more of a lie. Riding around on a tractor in the winter, again, it seems like white privilege. Grandpa had a tractor. In reality, he bought it used for like $1,000 from somebody and had to rebuild the motor. But Grandpa was a pretty fancy guy. He had some pretty extracurricular talents. And going through this phase, did a lot of stuff for me as an only child, having a disabled mom. His daughter became schizophrenic after domestic abuse, and some parts of her weren't schizophrenic. She just didn't want to deal with certain sides of society. And other parts of her kind of were schizophrenic because, again, she kind of wanted her version. This is the other parent's version, whom I don't know. So, fancy stuff my grandpa did for me, building me a treehouse, which is now sold, and on another piece of property at the civil dispute that becoming descendants of my grandma between me and my uncle. Which again, I can still walk in the yard and show you it. I guess I might as well do that, but here's this fancy treehouse with railings. I'll do that for you quick in this front little way, even though we had the civil dispute at the inheritance money. But here's a treehouse that Grandpa built through that same process. And, music studio eventually added, and etc., etc. So, got my solar pack out here charging, so I can keep my phone charged. And I'll go through this version of what reality is versus the digital world. And back then, scrapbooks were the Instagram of commentary. Treeless, treehouse, built in the summer of 1996. The treeless part. It's not actually attached to trees. Comprehension. We will call that comprehension. And so there are parts that other people got their missing pieces, other family members, cousins, and stuff like that. They had their pictures to make a scrapbook. Where this is the top of my studio right there, and it's hard to see everything, but this tree right here, this oak tree, is that tree, and this tree right here is that tree right here, blue spruce. And so again, this was planted when I was about, 99. So let's see, I was born in 86. So 11 or 12 when we planted this tree, and that tree was about probably 8 years old, 9 years old by that point. And I took a picture by it eventually, and it's now this tree. So if I took a step back, took a step back at where those trees are, that's that tree and that tree, that tree and that tree. And now we got rid of the camper and we put a studio in, or one, another shed that I finished off, continuing the legacy, which is interesting. Over the time they planted it, which again 1999, like a year before that, to where we're at now. Now I was born in 86, and that tree is about 8 years old, so we'll say 1990, to how old the tree was when she bought it from Menards or whatever else and planted it herself, to the legacy of my age now, which is 2026. So from the time she planted it, probably in 98, to and that was newer, to now it's probably a 30-year-old tree, almost 40, because again, it was 8 years old probably when she bought it from the nursery. And so there's interesting ways of this whole side of the property. Okay, so there's this goes up, and then there's a branch. If you go up over, here's the knot, and there's a branch, in which, again, every storm knocks off stuff, whatever. But this whole side over here got logged, which now, if you look over time, all the trees grew up over here. So it's just interesting data when you learn to cherish stuff, how much time it takes for trees to grow. You count the rings, you see 350, 400 years in your white oaks, and some of your white pines, you can count maybe 400 years, 450, 500 years. And then you start to understand what paper is, and understand, how long it takes before you can cut down trees to even become a house, in which the other side of society, Rockefeller Center, cuts down a tree every year. They still haven't figured out, just take out the concrete in front of Rockefeller Center and plant the fucking tree. And I want to come take a picture in front of it. Just imagine if Rockefeller plants the tree in front of the Rockefeller Center and they let it grow. Families could take a picture when their kids are like this big, and just imagine what it'll be when you're like 60 or 80 in front of that tree. And there you go. And we have that Rockefeller tree. We planted it, right? This is those differences why everybody yells at the Rockefeller family. Get out of your fucking mental illness. Go plant the goddamn tree so families could take a picture of it and stand in front of it. And people will come to New York and cherish that Rockefeller Christmas tree a little bit more, for those that like to travel. So in these weird ways, here's that same tree facing the other way. Here's the tree. Here's this bur oak. Here's the tree, and here's the bur oak. This one right, get my finger in here, right here. And so, oddly enough, it just shows what time can give you. It was only maybe 16 to 20 feet tall, and now, they're damn near side by side of how tall they are. And different versions of storms and straight line winds that had different storms that ended up landing on the cabin itself, on the back part. The back part here, and if you go on my Facebook or whatever else, you end up seeing the back of my cabin with the property up for sale now. Kind of proving this whole what a legacy is, which I'm contemplating on leaving this with the people I sell the house to, so they can learn to appreciate the guy that built it, the guy that took care of it, a hard-working man. And as much as I'd love for my daughter to see it, you don't want to become so attached to stuff that you go mentally traumatized when people get pissed off or etc. Because again, it's a turnover. You go from a dormitory to your first house that you rent with friends in college. And if you're smart and do good in school, you go into your fraternities. And when you turn over out of college, you end up buying your first house type thing. There's just certain versions of this I'm taking the time to cherish after, into my second year of grieving after Mom and my grandma passed, pretty much the last of the side that I trust and entrusted. And again, I've been raised by women and taken care of by women. And when my grandpa passed, I ended up taking care of those women. Not taking care like kill them in some mafia set, but took care of them because they took care of me. And kind of disappointed in the digital platform where I didn't get to have my fruition, my dream accomplished with my music money from Weirdo as DJ Money to have gotten a new car and give my grandma and mom a happy ending. Instead, I got beat up in the digital world and ended up, within TuneCore and Facebook and Instagram. I got beat up right before they died, so I couldn't have my little legacy. Granted, I have a trademark from the company. I have copyright for the song. For some reason, somebody else's mental illness overruled law and my mental illness of trying to become a musician, professional singer, songwriter, dancer, and it's here on this page, on this OmoneyRecords page, my record label. And I guess for the people that have been farming, which would have been the suitors up to Trump, here's a suitor looking over at Trump and their little versions of farming me, but at the domestic abuse they put me through. To people who pay attention to stuff, there was the 2 kids later. Here's the tree and the kids, little farmers, and how tall they were as teenagers. Whether or not you're farming corn or you're farming human beings like Rockefeller and Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook, and their new mental illnesses that document their favorite titty pictures, pussy pictures, and human beings and their favoritisms to the ones they delete because they have jealousy issues and their passive aggressive behaviors. And they delete them on social media like a Mortal Kombat character when you hit reset on your Super Nintendo or PlayStation. And yet at the same time, in the digital world, they just delete you. They just like get rid of your account or fuck around with your passwords and what they call cybersecurity. Whatever their mental illness is, I can't quite figure it out, but I found new mental illnesses. And it's interesting. It really is interesting. But anyways, my name is Owen. And this is kind of the point to where we're at now, where I have my property for sale. And so I will end this today as a peaceful place for the family side of what work we did here in Black River Falls that we called the cabin. And, my next ones will be pretty much when life started with me and Mom. So happy Mother's Day to some side of my truth. And I appreciate y'all. Now, how do I stop the thingy? It's still recording. All right, let's share it now. No, it's still recording. So how do I actually stop the recording? What do I do? It won't let me stop it though. Why not? Alright, well, interesting. So, how do I save it? How does this work?